Welcome to the fourth special Numisma Talk of National Coin Week 2024. Every day this week, we have had a new presentation to help celebrate. Thank you all for joining us. During this presentation, you may come up with questions, and if you do, please use the Q&A button on your screen to send in your question, as all of you are muted on this presentation. Your question will be addressed at the end of the presentation. And now I would like to introduce you to today's presenter, Peter Tompa. Peter serves as the IAPN's Executive Director. Previously, he acted as the IAPN's outside legal counsel, advocating for fair treatment for the micro and small businesses of the numismatic trade. I messed that up a little bit. I'm just going to go back so it makes sense. Small business of the numismatic trade before government regulators. He has been an avid ancient coin collector since he first saw such coins for sale while on a European family vacation in the early 70s. He is a life member of the ANA and the Ancient Coin Collections Guild, as well as a life fellow of the American Numismatic Society. He was recently appointed as the IAPN's representative on a European Commission expert subgroup on dialogue with the art market. Peter will be presenting Are Your Papers in Order? And Peter, it is all yours.
Okay, thank you. One thing I'm not great at is technical stuff, so I'm going to try to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Thanks for coming and listening to this. Some of you probably have heard about import restrictions, etc., and may have heard about the Ancient Coin Collectors Guild. I want to talk a little bit today about just the realities of what's going on and how you can best avoid problems. So with that, let's just go to the first slide. All right, so here's the kind of picture you do not want to be involved in. This is a publicity photo by Homeland Security Investigations, who had seized 51 Greek coins, and they were turning them over to the Greek ambassador to the United States in Chicago. If you look at the press releases, there's some reading between the lines. You start thinking, because they sort of pitch this as returning stolen coins to Greece, but when you look further into it, and they just talk about not having documentation, one suspects that the reason that these coins were returned was actually that they were covered under, or allegedly covered under, the Memorandum of Understanding, a cultural property Memorandum of Understanding with Greece, and they fall within that, and the importer, who was a collector or whomever, we don't know who it was not able to produce the required documentation. The other strange thing about this is some of the eagle-eyed experts that I know, Alan Walker being one of them, looked at some of the coins on the web, because there's some other publicity pictures, and he quickly determined that a number of the coins didn't even come from Greece, and they're not actually even on the designated list for Greece. So it literally looks like customs, saw coins that looked like they were Greek, held them, asked the importer or the collector, whoever imported them into the U.S., to provide provenance information. They weren't able to do that, and so they seized them, and then they have this elaborate ceremony where everyone looks great. We would like to be able to tell you more about it, but frankly, the government has stonewalled us on that. The Ancient Coin Collectors Guild sent the government a Freedom of Information Act request to try to find out more information about this. And because I'm also a member of that, have been stonewalled to date. But we're trying to find out more and get some transparency. So let's go forward to the legal justifications for seizures of coins and other cultural goods. So, this doesn't just impact coins. It impacts quite a few different items. And in fact, along with the press release on that prior seizure, Customs mentioned that 20,000 objects have been returned to their countries of origin in the last number of years. And, that's not a number to sneeze at. So, this is actually a serious issue, although candidly, enforcement is a bit spotty. So in any event, the way that Customs justifies seizures is if there's a misrepresentation of value or a country of origin on the customs form. That's one way. The other one is a violation of the Cultural Property Implementation Act. And those of you who have followed MOUs and what the ACC is doing, that's pretty much what the focus has been. And then also there has been another way things are sometimes returned, although less frequently, stolen from a private or public collection or from the ground. And this is the uncontroversial part under a national cultural patrimony law. And we'll get into it a bit further, what that actually means. So let's go forward. So let's start with misrepresentations on customs forms. So federal law authorizes forfeiture of cultural goods, including coins that have been introduced into the U.S. based upon falsely declared values or improper countries of origin. And there's a statute. And this doesn't apply to coins. It applies to pretty much everything, and not only cultural goods, but pretty much anything. So under this provision, honest mistakes are no defense, and the importer is liable for the exporter's misstatement. So the exporter could have put some misstatement in form. It could have been innocent, but too bad. It's a basis for the item to be seized. And in fact, a number of years back, there was a very, very valuable gold fiale, which is a sort of gold implement that was of Greek in origin that was seized on this basis. And the owner of the piece was out quite a bit of money because of that. So in any event, honest mistakes are no defense. The importer is liable. Proper value for items is the, so if it's for resale, it's that of an arm's length transaction or fair market value for things that are under consignment. So there is some wiggle room, but I mean, there are actual, limitations on, what you could say the value is there. And then country of origin is where the item is manufactured, not the place where it was shipped or even where it was found. So, some things to think about when you talk about misrepresentations on customs form. The people who love when this happens, which is the people from the archaeological advocacy groups, talk about this being an easy kill for customs because they don't really have to show very much if they find a misstatement on the customs form. That's really just a basis in itself to return something. There's mistakes that happen even, and I said there's some innocent ones, and some of the innocent ones, or maybe it's not that innocent, but it's understandable at least, is a number of times I've heard of cases where items has been seized because they were grossly undervalued. And what the importer says is, well, I did that not to try to trick customs, but because I was concerned that the item, if it had a high value on there, it would encourage theft, essentially. This is kind of an interesting issue. There is an argument that this isn't even really material because art generally comes into art and antiquities and coins and things like that generally come to the United States duty-free. So the value is kind of irrelevant in one sense, but the few courts that have looked at it, just don't buy that materiality argument. So again, country of origin is another somewhat confusing thing because it's not really well defined. And if you're not knowledgeable about the field, you could think, well, it's where the place where the item came from. So if I bought like a Roman coin in England, it should be England. It would be, if it was from the Rome Mint, it would be from Italy. And then it's not even where the item is found, even though that is relevant under the Cultural Property Implementation Act statutory language. Okay, so the second one is violations of the Cultural Property Implementation Act. And so this statute was put into place back in the 1980s. For many years, there weren't any import restrictions on coins. That changed in 2007 under what we think are some questionable circumstances. We were able to determine that there's something called the Cultural Property Advisory Committee advocated against that, but it was done anyway. And then when the State Department filed official reports with Congress, they made it sound like the Cultural Property Advisory Committee was actually in favor of it. So I'll just point out the irony that if you put a misrepresentation on the customs form, then you could lose your coin. But if the State Department lies about what it's doing, nothing necessarily will happen. And in fact, nothing has happened to them based on that. So if something's on a designated list and there's increasing numbers of coins that have been put on there, then it can only be imported with an export certificate, which really just doesn't exist for most countries, or proof that the coin was out of the country for which import restrictions were granted before the effective date of any regulations. Or there's also a 10-year rule too, which I didn't put in here. But the main problem is it's difficult to secure this kind of information in practice, particularly for the lower value coins that most people collect. I mean, some of the very valuable things will have that kind of information, but many items will not. Okay, so some issues related to the designated lists and enforcement. So looking at how this is sort of developed over time, it becomes readily apparent that these lists have become increasingly overbroad. They include coins that are not only first discovered within and subject to the export control of a particular country, which is the statutory requirement, but ones that circulated regionally or even internationally, which really doesn't make sense based upon the wording of the statute and the fact that coins really did circulate quite far from where they were made. We constantly remind the State Department that things like Roman coins are found from Roman coins from the mint in Rome are found in as far west as the UK or Scotland or even Ireland sometimes, and then as far east as Sri Lanka. So it's hard to make the claim that these things are only found in a particular country or a particular coin came from a particular country just based upon the fact that it's on a list. But they've been increasingly ignoring what the statute requires and just adding coins. The other issue is how they're enforced. So the concern there is, if you read the statute, the intent really was to have focused restrictions only to apply to items that were illicitly exported after the effective date of the regulations. And so that's fairly limited, and that sort of protects the legal trade in such items, for example, in the EU. But the way they actually enforce it is broader. It's anything that's imported into the United States after the effective date of the regulation. So because of that, it also impacts things that have been like floating around in legitimate markets in Europe for decades. And that's the real major problem. And that's one of the things that the ACCG and IAPN and some other groups, ANA joining us, have tried to focus on and try to get government decision makers to notice this problem. So let's talk about stolen. So the first type of stolen is the kind of stolen everyone thinks about. So if someone's coin collection was stolen from their house or from a public institution or a museum, whatever, everyone agrees that it should go back to the owner, the true owner. That's not controversial at all. The real big issue, the larger issue, is that the government has since the 1970s and increasingly has also returned to countries items that are declared to be national patrimony under what are called national patrimony laws. And so these laws basically vest title of a particular artifact, typically if it's found in the ground in the government. There's the wordings that are different in a lot of the different statutes, and there's an argument to be had that some of them aren't real patrimony laws, but the U.S. government tends to apply them fairly broadly if they can. And we'll get into why this is shortly. So why is this? So this is the number one reason why this is. It's soft power. So this comes up with countries where we really don't have generally great relations. And in fact, Clifford Mishler, who was a former president of the ANA, myself, and a number of people were in a video meeting with the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Educational Affairs at the time, Mr. Lusenhoff. This is a couple of years ago. And we weren't the only ones there. We were also accompanied by members of the minority Jewish groups who were really upset that these cultural property MOUs were being entered into with countries in the Middle East like Yemen, where Jews had once lived in fair numbers, but they were basically culturally cleansed after the creation of the state of Israel. But the US is entering these cultural MOUs with these countries that recognize the rights of these countries to the cultural heritage of these displaced minorities. So in any event, a young woman who was the executive director of an organization called Jamina, which is Jews and indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa, made this very impassioned statement about, how this is recognizing the rights of these authoritarian governments to her cultural heritage. And the response from Mr. Lusenhoff was, well, yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from, but this is a way that we could collaborate with countries we don't normally agree with. So, what do you say to that, basically? So that's kind of what's going in here. And this is an example of this. This is a recent, they're shaking their hands over a recent MOU with Yemen, which is controversial because when it was done bypassing the normal way of doing things, which would be to run it through something called the Cultural Property Advisory Committee, where at least there's some opportunity for the public to comment. And so it was just done without that. They had a closed meeting where they, of course, invited the people who support this, which tend to be the archaeological advocacy groups, and signed this thing. So that is the major driver of this. Another thing which is unfortunate is, and it's more of a justification, is when ISIS came about, the archaeological advocacy groups and the State Department just jumped on this as a justification for two things: for funding for their own work, and then also to have further clampdowns on collectors. Because of ISIS, because of the claim that ISIS, a major funding source for ISIS was stolen antiquities, that was used as a justification for, again, funding, and then also a whole bunch of import restrictions for these Middle Eastern dictatorships. And it turns out, at the time, myself and a number of other people raised questions about this. And later on, the RAND Corporation, which is well respected, did a very, very deep dive analysis into this and concluded that it was total nonsense. They made maybe a couple $100,000 based upon this, but that has to be compared against the millions that they made from whole sorts of other things. The main thing being hot oil and extortion. So it was always just a minor issue. But it was one that the archaeological advocacy groups and the State Department jumped on in order to sort of pursue their agenda. And, it's one of these things, after it's disproven, no one's going back and, revoking these import restrictions or the other things that have been happening, particularly in the European Union, where the same thing happened. They put in some very, very drastic import controls there, which will be enforced shortly. And the fact that it's justified by this doesn't change the fact that they're not going to change what they've done. So in any case, so that's been a driver also. And then the last one is that the archaeological advocacy groups, and particularly this Antiquities Coalition group, are very, very well funded and also very, very politically connected. The Antiquities Coalition, we've looked at their IRS Form 990s. They basically spend $500,000 a year on their advocacy work. And the president of the coalition is a very attractive, very well-spoken woman who happens to be the wife of one of the, I don't know if he still is, but he was like one of the top 2 or 3 people at Goldman Sachs. She has her own, she had her own consulting business, which of course focused on Middle East and North Africa as well as China. And she had previously served in the Clinton administration, and so has a lot of contacts, from her work in the Middle East, also from her husband, etc., and very politically connected. And then also she is really great at public relations. In fact, she sold her business to Edelman Public Relations, so that's where she is now. So they're very good at ginning up their views that collectors are evil and funding terrorism and all this sort of stuff to push the agenda that they have. And we don't really have much to match that, unfortunately. So how to avoid trouble? Well, one way to avoid trouble is to just buy things in the United States, because the danger of there being a problem once it's here is limited, although customs can always go back and go after something that came in illegally that was just been sitting around here for a while. And I have to say that this isn't just applied to ancient coins anymore. They've been extending these import restrictions. The latest ones for Pakistan go up to the 1750s, so it include all sorts of Mughal coins, etc. So you can't really just say this is an ancient coin problem anymore. So the other way to avoid trouble, and this perhaps is a pitch for IAPN, where I'm the executive director, but the dealers of IAPN are a bit more sophisticated in this than most dealers, and they do have some general awareness of the issues. And so I think you're better served if you're buying something from abroad to buy through an IAPN dealer, or a dealer from another recognized trade association like the British one or the German one, etc. The other way to avoid trouble is to stay apprised of trade restrictions, and a good way of doing that is to join the Ancient Coin Collectors Guild, or at least consult its website, which, by the way, needs to be updated to include these recent import restrictions on Pakistan, which are very, 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 very broad. Let's see. So I mean, the bottom line here is that there's still lots of coins out there, and if you're careful, you can and should be able to avoid problems, but you need to be aware that there are concerns out there, that coins do get detained and seized, and in rare cases, the U.S. Customs or Homeland Security investigations, or even the FBI, or more recently the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, will go after a coin and may go after the dealer or the collector, if there's any evidence of wrongdoing, rather than just purchasing an object and not really understanding if there might be a problem. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. So far, we have a question that is, what is considered the country of origin of a coin manufactured by a traveling mint? For example, a Roman coin minted in Pannonia.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think you'd have to make your scholarly case. I guess the way customs would look at it, it's probably every place where it potentially could have been minted. So, if the mint traveled between Greece and North Macedonia, you have to put down both as the country of origin, and they do that. So I know some of the antiquities dealers and like auction houses like Sotheby's, for certain things, they really don't know the exact country of origin, so they put down multiple countries, and that sounds like that would be the case here.
Better to be safe than sorry, I guess.
Correct.
Many thanks, says this person. How can you be kept updated when MOU import restrictions are being considered?
Yeah, that's why I referenced the Ancient Coin Collectors Guild. So if you join the Ancient Coin Collectors Guild, we do have an internal email system where we email people when these things come up. And then if you just go to the website, there is actually a list of current import restrictions that quite frankly needs to be updated to include Pakistan. And the Pakistan list is actually very, very troubling because it really includes coins that not just circulated there, but circulated, as I said, regionally and internationally. They even included Roman imperial coins, which they really have stayed away from previously. So the question is how is they're going to, how's that really going to be enforced? Because the country of origin on the, import documentation will say, wherever the Roman mint was, but, how are they going to enforce that for Pakistan? My guess is they're not really going to enforce it unless, a package is coming from Southeast Asia or something like that. But I mean, it is a concern. It's a real concern for collectors. I know Indian coins have been, gotten more popular in recently. And I mean, there's quite a large, Indian and Pakistani diaspora here in the United States. And, those people, people who are Pakistani or Indian descent would, a number of them like to collect what we call Indian coins, which include the Mughal coins and, other coins from India. So, but now these are on the Pakistani designated list, and India has also asked for import restrictions, and I suspect they'll give them basically the same list. And then the question is, if they seize this stuff, I mean, India and Pakistan don't get along together anyway. Are they going to arm wrestle over who gets what? Who knows? Anyway.
Yeah. Another question, are there any specific problems related to trading between the US and Canada?
Yes, I mean, Canada is a foreign country, so all the import controls that are in effect in the United States impact things that are coming in from Canada. I mean, obviously people can, drive between here and Canada and maybe, not declare stuff, but, you're supposed to declare stuff. And, if you don't declare something and it's on a list or whatever, I mean, that would be considered smuggling. So you kind of do it at your own risk.
Okay, what about coins that were stolen and then seen in an auction?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, Paul.
I apologize. What about coins that were stolen and then seen in an auction?
Yeah, I mean, this does happen on occasion. So typically what happens is, auctions, and one of the beauties of the auction process is that it, puts stuff out there for people to see. So, a number of auction houses will get inquiries from either law enforcement or even, an embassy or even a person saying, hey, this coin that's for auction is potentially stolen or whatever. And typically what the auction house will do is it will pull it from the auction and then let the collector or whoever consigned it fight it out with the the entity that's making the request. A lot of times they do get, or they have been getting, like sort of nonsense demands from embassies, just letters saying this is stolen, or this is ours, or something like that. And so what most of them do in that case is just to send up a polite letter back saying, well, what's your basis for that? And they wait to see if the embassy comes up with anything. And if they don't, they just ignore it and let the auction proceed. It's harder though to ignore a subpoena from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office or the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they will not do that, obviously. So they'll hold the object, and it will it will be worked out one way or the other. Usually, unfortunately, because of the cost of fighting these things and the fact that lawyers do cost money. I'm an attorney. I never charge a huge amount of money, but it's still like $450, $500 an hour, which is actually on the low end. You can imagine what legal costs would be compared to the value of most items. So for the most part, what happens is if there's just a demand, the thing gets turned over, and that's an issue with the import restrictions in particular, because if they're just stopping things just because it's on a designated list, your options to fight that are very limited. And one of the main limitations is cost.
Okay, in most media reports about ancient coins, they are described as rare and priceless, even when they are in reality quite common and cheap. How can we educate media professionals to report more accurately about numismatic issues?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a problem area. The other side is very organized and has very, very good relationships with the media. And the media love to write these stories about these things being rare and valuable, et cetera. We don't really have an educational program for media. I mean, it'd be great if we did. Letters to the editor and things like that don't really rate. I've done blog posts. I did an article for Coins Weekly on that Chicago seizure, just going through the documentation that was provided, press releases, and raising questions about, what was the basis for this, and sent it out to a whole bunch of different other news sources, and of course, no one picks it up. So, I mean, that is a problem. And the real issue is that the media loves these stories where, these wealthy collectors are stealing the cultural heritage of some, poor country, and the good archaeologists and good U.S. law enforcement are righting the wrong, not really looking deeply into what's really going on here. It'd be great if it could change, but that takes money, and while the Antiquities Coalition is very well funded, the Ancient Coin Collectors Guild is not, and neither is the Global Heritage Alliance, which is another advocacy group that I work with. But we're doing our best with the resources we have, which are very, 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 very minimal.
Yeah. What happens if ancient coins you purchased overseas are seized by U.S. Customs? What should you do? So I guess kind of on similar to the auction house, but it's more of a just a
Right. Well, I mean, number one is be honest with them. Do not lie to them, because you're just going to make things much, much worse. If you can hire an attorney, hire an attorney. There are attorneys who specialize this. I mean, if you look at the ACCG website, you could just email the ACCG for suggestions. I fielded those in the past. But basically, what you have to do, and if it's a stolen coin issue, that's it. But if it's an import restrictions issue, sometimes you can pull together the information that they require, because when they stop something, they'll send you a letter saying, this coin was imported in violation of this, and can you provide the necessary certification? So if you recall, there is a certification you could do. It's either you have to show it was out of the country for which import restrictions were granted as of the date of the restrictions, or 10 years. And this is difficult to do, but it's not necessarily impossible to do, even for low value coins. For example, when the Yemen import restrictions came in, I was contacted by an auction house in Europe about an American who had bought a Yemeni coin, one of these Himmerite pieces, again, not very valuable, from the auction house, had it come to the US, and it was stopped. And so they basically, I mean, they went sort of the extra mile. So they contacted the person who bought the item, the customs contacted them. That person contacted the auction house. The auction house contacted who consigned the coin, and it was the son of some guy. And the guy reached out to his father, who was very elderly. The father wrote a letter saying where he bought the coin, and they accepted that. So it was out of Yemen well before the date of the restrictions. But it was a huge hassle for a coin that was probably worth like $80 or $90,
Wow.
Which is, it's ridiculous. And, a larger question is, with all the things that customs has to worry about in terms of, fentanyl, very dangerous materials coming into the country potentially, you mean they're spending all this time trying to track down the provenance of an $80 or $90 coin just so the State Department can have soft power with Yemen. I mean, it's if some people in Congress really had an appreciation of this, it would be helpful, because it's just amazing a waste of everyone's time to try to achieve some goal which they're not really achieving.
Looks like we have a couple more. So the
Well, we have time, so keep it going.
Okay. Most paper money is modern. There are some 14th century paper money notes from China. Are there similar restrictions on paper money import export as antiquities?
None that I'm aware of. You'd have to look at so if you go on the ACCG website, you can find go under China. I mean, it focuses on coins, but you could click on that and it has the designated list for China. And I don't believe that paper money is on there, but don't give them any ideas if they're listening in. We may have given them an idea.
Oh dear. What is the logical argument for keeping a coin in a drawer in the country of origin and never sharing its view with anyone in another country? Who benefits?
Well, I mean, I think that's one of our arguments. No one benefits. I mean, unlike some cultural heritage, which is truly rare and culturally significant, coins are very, very common. And there's so many of them that you really can't expect national governments to have the ability to really, protect, conserve, and study them. That's why collectors are so important. I'm sort of preaching to the choir here, but there really is not much of a reason. And there's even less of a reason for countries like China, Italy, Bulgaria, Pakistan, India. I mean, in those countries, there are large legal internal markets. So why is the US government, precluding Americans from importing things that are openly available for sale there? Because the theory behind this is that, by doing this, you're limiting demand and then limiting any incentive to loot archaeological sites. But if the market there is like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, 9, 10 times larger for the same material as here, how does that achieve that goal? So there's a lot of if you think about it more fully, there really is some serious questions about what they're doing. Unfortunately, the focus is like, oh, we're just protecting against theft and we're returning, things to their rightful owners. And that's they keep on pushing that angle, and that's what the press eats up. And so no one really focuses on this on Capitol Hill, although we've tried, certainly to educate people in Congress about it.
This one is, if I take a bunch of coins overseas for an auction, is it advisable to record them photographically to return the unsold coins home?
Yeah, so there's apparently a customs form. I mean, I'm not a customs lawyer, but there's apparently a form that you're supposed to fill out if you're shipping things overseas for auction or a show or something. In fact, this very thing got somebody who dealt in Chinese artifacts in lots and lots of trouble, because what happened was, this wasn't coins, but it was artifacts. They sold Chinese artifacts here in the United States. The MOU with China came about. They shipped artifacts abroad. I don't know to which country, maybe Europe or who knows where, or maybe Japan, something like that. And then they brought the stuff back, and it got seized, and then they made up provenances for it, which customs figured out they were false, and then so they got into trouble, creating a false provenance to try to get back what they had here in the United States, but brought abroad.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do that, you need to fill in these, get these forms. Customs broker should be able to help you with that kind of thing.
Okay. Coinage in the name of Alexander the Great was struck at over 90 different mints across at least 15 different modern nations. In some cases, the identity of the mint is uncertain. How can a customs inspector who is not a trained numismatist determine where such a coin was made?
Good question. I don't think they can. I mean, that's
Yeah.
one of the reasons why we've argued that those kind of coins should not be on there. And they've been inconsistent. Sometimes that argument is won out, and sometimes they are on the list for certain countries. What they do is they do work with people in academia who are coin experts, and they get them to identify coins. But when they identify them, they just identify the mint. They can't identify where the thing was found. And so, that again is, they're seizing coins based upon the identity of a mint as opposed to where the thing was found. And that's an issue that we've had with how they enforce this, because if you read the statute, it really is there to protect archaeological sites, which goes to where it was found, not where it was minted.
All right, I'm gonna give another couple seconds here. Oh, got another one. I was gonna say that's it, but nope.
Okay.
Let's see. Are these MOUs largely cast in stone and here to stay?
Yeah, I think they are, because they never, so they're renewed every 5 years, and they go through the same sort of analysis every 5 years, but they tend not to end them. In fact, they tend to expand them to include more and more things over time. And again, it's because it's a diplomatic issue. I mean, the only way to change this is really to change the statute and put more limitations on them. And that's certainly something that Global Heritage Alliance and the ACCG have looked at, but getting someone in Congress interested to help with that is an issue.
Yeah. All right, it looks like that's it. Oh, every time I say it, somebody else, something
That's
else.
fine. It's still within an hour.
Yeah,
So
we're okay. Let's see. Can I have my friend send me some arrow tips and Roman rings from France to the USA?
Well, you could, but if they're on a designated list, they better say they were out of Italy as of the 2011, because that's when the import restrictions went on. And that was for coins. Actually, I think it was for other artifacts as 2000. I think it was 2001 or something. Yeah, 2001 or something like that. So yeah, you got to look at the Italian designated list. I mean, you could try, but it could certainly be seized, and then you're in trouble, and then your friend is potentially in trouble too.
Where is the exhaustive list of everything?
Well, again, look at the ACCG website. I mean, that's up to date except for Pakistan. So that has everything on it. And
Okay.
again, I would suggest, I mean, people who look at this at the ACCG list, please join the ACCG. You'll get, further information, because we do send out email updates, et cetera, about what's going on. And the money that you give to the ACCG, I mean, everyone who is who is on the board, et cetera, does their, the time is free, including myself. They do the big expenses. They do have a lobbyist who has been helpful in trying to make our case in Capitol Hill, but it's tough, mainly because you get sympathy, but sympathy doesn't get you very far. The real issue is that it's a sort of a third or fourth tier issue, and it's just hard to get any activity. I mean, Congress in general is just dysfunctional. And then to try to get them to focus on something like this is difficult. The other issue is they have, I mean, a number of Congress people have written letters, et cetera. In fact, Congressman Joe Wilson from South Carolina just wrote a letter to the State Department asking for an Inspector General investigation on the Yemeni import restrictions MOU, because it wasn't done in, as far as anyone could tell, in accordance with the statute. It wouldn't shock me if the State Department just ignores that, and because Wilson has other things to do, they figure out he's there won't be any follow-up. But I mean, that's happened with other things that Congress has done. We've had other letters, and the one that was surprising to our lobbyists, and we had him back then too, was that he was able to get a letter from Paul Ryan, who at the time, people may not remember, but he was the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. Subsequently became a presidential a vice presidential candidate, but he wrote a letter, or he spearheaded a letter with 13 other members of the House of Representatives. And then separately, the chair of the House Foreign Relations Committee, Ileana Ross-Lehtinen, wrote a letter again about the Italian MOU, saying, do not, if you're going to renew it, this is back in 2011, do not extend it further to include coins. I mean, both of them said that. So this is a letter from a substantial number of House members, including people who were, very powerful, and they just blew it off, and they just imposed import restrictions on coins, and tough. They kind of figured rightly that there wouldn't be any follow-up. So, that's the reality of this, unfortunately.
Looks like we have one more. Are these bilateral agreements barring trade both ways?
No. And that's because the U.S. really does not have export controls. There is one exception, though, that is not yet in effect. There was a reference to arrowheads. Well, there are a lot of people who collect Native American artifacts in the United States. And typically, traditionally, the U.S. had no export controls on art. You could literally send the Liberty Bell to France if it was a private item. But now there are export controls on in Native American artifacts. They're not totally in effect yet because the regulations have not been written, but the statute authorizing the regulations has been written. So when that happens, the State Department's gonna say, "Oh, look, this is bilateral because they are doing stuff for us." Because many years, everyone would just say, "Hey, we're doing all this stuff for these foreign countries, and they're not doing anything for us." But now the State Department will say, "Oh yeah, they'll be returning Native American artifacts." So the answer is yes for now, but not for long.
Are tokens and exonumia included?
Not yet. The one thing, so when they put the import restrictions on items, they could only put import restrictions on archaeological and ethnological objects. And so those have definitions. We've argued that coins really don't fit the archaeological definition because they're of limited cultural significance. And for something to be restricted, it has to have cultural significance. And we say, well, there's made in many multiples, so they're really not culturally significant. But the State Department has blown through that. The other thing is, but there's a date limitation on that. It's just 250 years, and that's where with the Pakistani restrictions, it only goes up to 250 years. So there's another thing called ethnological objects. But if you look at the definition of ethnological objects, coins and tokens and things like that really don't apply because they have to be the products of pre-industrial societies. And when they're writing the statutes, it's a statute which is back in the early 80s. You wouldn't say this now, but they talked about primitive artifacts. So what they meant by primitive was from native cultures, that kind of thing. So if it's an ethnological object, you can restrict it up to today, but things like coins and tokens and things like that just don't fit. And that's been helpful for certain things, like, for example, with the Pakistani import restrictions, the upcoming Indian ones, we were concerned that they're going to put restrictions on the coins of the Raj, the British Raj, and coins from, the East India Company. But they didn't do that. And that's because all those coins were made, after, more recently than 250 years. And then they're certainly not ethnological objects because they're products of, mass production, not products of quote unquote primitive cultures.
All right, I think that's it. I would like to thank everybody that has been here today celebrating National Coin Week, and to you, Peter, for a really great presentation. Our regularly scheduled Numisma Talks are being recorded and will be available to our members on our new e-learning academy at the end of April, actually Monday. So please be sure to check for future programs on our website at money.org. The lives will always be for everyone and for free. The recorded ones that are on our e-learning academy will be a member benefit. So I want to thank everybody again, and hope everybody has a great evening.
Okay, well, thank you, Paula. Appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for attending.